Broadcasting to the patients and staff of Watford General Hospital, this is Watford Hospital Radio.
Good morning, you are listening to the Sunday Breakfast Show. I'm joined in the studio by Emily, who's about to be interviewing Paul Welsh of Elstree Studios. And Emily works for my news magazine.
I do indeed.
Does indeed, and she's a very good interview. I was lucky enough to be interviewed by her a few months ago actually about the Olympic torch, so that was good fun. And now I'm lucky enough to have her back in the studio with Cliff and Paul, and we're going to have a brilliant interview I think that's about to happen. So I'll leave it up to you, Emily.
Brilliant, thank you very much, Holly. So I am really excited to be meeting you today, Paul, or Mr. Elstree, should I say, as you are known by some. So you are the official historian for Elstree Film Studios, and I wanted to know how that came about.
Basically, because I'm the last man standing, really. I think it's just that the studios closed in 1993, reopened in 1996, which means that none of the staff there today go back any further, at the most, to 1996. So when they get inquiries, Elstree goes back 70 years beyond that, to 1926. So when they get inquiries about history, companies making documentaries, that type of thing, they tend to refer them to me because there's more likelihood that I'll understand what they're asking than they can at the moment.
Fantastic. So did you work at the studios before you became the historian? What was your
it all began when my late father was a Foley artist in films, and there's the old sound effects, the horses' hooves, the old coconuts clicking together, that type of stuff. So I grew up in the town, and I went to the studios as a young lad in 1960, at my first visit, and then in the mid-1970s the managing director asked me if I would organise any special events that came up, because they no longer had a publicity department as such. So I then drifted into organising special events, and because of that the newspapers asked me if I would write, if you're going to keep meeting all these stars, why don't you write about what they're like and visiting Star Wars set and all that type of thing. So the end result of that was I needed to start interviewing people, and it just went on from there.
Fantastic. And so you have also been involved in the entertainment industry as entertainment officer for Elstree Council and chairman of Elstree Screen Heritage.
Yes.
Where did your sort of passion for film begin? Is it because of your father?
I think so. It's because, as I said earlier, I grew up in the town, and the town has a huge history of film and television production. Next year we celebrate the centenary of film production in the town, 100 years. So it's an amazing legacy. And when I was growing up, you would often see a film crew out on the streets, utilising local scenes for whatever it was. It wasn't unusual to find a film star in the local pub before they had their entourages as they do today. And the whole atmosphere had a film town theme to it. So I think you kind of progressed into that feeling that celluloid was in your blood. It was just... and then my late father used to come home, and my mum always got annoyed because he would be pinching things from the house to go away and make sound effects with. Because this was in the 50s and 60s where you didn't have the computer technology of today. So if you... I mean, things like a Dracula film, he had pinched the cabbage that was for Sunday lunch. Because by sticking the sound of a wooden stake going into a cabbage makes the sound of it going into a human chest.
Wow.
And he would borrow things to do the effects for, say, Thunderball, the James Bond film.
Yes.
Somebody's skiing, where you think, well, why don't they use skis? But you don't. You use something else. And he used to go home and get cleaning brushes and all sorts of odd things. And so our house kept getting decimated by these things disappearing out of the place.
Wow.
But sadly, like all youngsters, you don't take too much notice of your parents, and I never really sat down and talked to him at any length about his career. And he's been gone now 33 years, and you regret that. This is a tip, really. If your parents and your grandparents, especially if you're interested in family trees, things like that, ask them, because they're the ones who will know, and you can't go back on that later on.
And I believe it was last year you published a book about the history of the studios, Elstree Confidential.
Yes.
Can you tell us a bit about what readers can find in your book?
Well, it's about 220 odd pages. A big size book, A3 is it? It's a big A4, I think. Big size, heavy book. It was published as a chance conversation. I was with the museum, Borehamwood Museum people, having a drink in the old Mops and Brooms one day, and we were talking about old film stars, and I was talking to different people, and he said, well, why don't you put all this down on paper? And I said, well, what's the purpose? Why do I want to do that? And he said, well, we need funds. It would be a lovely fundraiser for us, the museum, and so that gave me a point to do it. So I used to go home and just a couple of hours a day, just for about 6 weeks, compile a lot of anecdotes and memories of over 53 years of film studio visits, and I had about 200 odd photographs that hadn't been published that I could use, so I put those into the book as well. And touch wood, the hardback sold out, and now we're just reprinted in paperback, and it's raised some very useful funds for Borehamwood Museum, which is all run by volunteers.
And is that where people can purchase your book in the museum, or
They can buy it either from the Borehamwood Museum, or they can go online to Elstree Screen Heritage, which has its own website, and funds the books sold through that are also for fundraising for the Elstree Screen Heritage. So either way, really, online or in person at the Borehamwood Museum.
Brilliant. And you've been involved in the campaign to save Elstree Studios.
Yes.
Can you tell me about your involvement with that?
Well, that kicked off in 1988. The company that owned it wanted to sell it off for redevelopment purposes because they were in trouble financially. And there was a film called Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade shooting at the time. And the production manager of that said, well, let's start a campaign. You become chairman, and I'll help get T-shirts and all sorts of things printed. And I had a meeting with Steven Spielberg and George Lucas on the set, and they said, well, we'll support the campaign, we'll give you our names to it, and of course as soon as you start talking about Spielberg and Lucas, the whole world's media becomes interested in the fate of Elstree.
Yes.
So I had camera crews coming over, doing interviews from Germany, Australia, Iceland, the Argentine, America, Italy, all sorts of places. And you found sometimes you were doing interviews, and a friend of mine went on holiday to Spain and said, oh, I saw you on TV speaking Spanish. And of course they just dubbed me. And then and the Argentine, they said, well, we'll do the whole thing in long shot, and then we'll put a voice in for what you're going to say, but you can talk rubbish because it's all in long shot. And so I was speaking, multilingual without ever having learned a foreign language in my life. So that impressed people how fluent I was. But it was good fun, and Spielberg and Lucas were very supportive, and that helped. We went to the House of Commons. We had 15,000 petition signatures. People like Sean Connery, who were at the studio, signed the petition. The cast of EastEnders and Coronation Street and Emmerdale. And the campaign was good fun to be involved in. It was something really special, how everybody rallied, and it was very worthwhile. And unfortunately, the campaign ended up dragging on for 8 years.
Wow.
So I ended up being chairman of this campaign for 8 years, and eventually in 1996, the studio was sold to the local council,
Yes.
who still own it, and it's now a roaring success. It's home to all sorts of interesting productions. We had Brad Pitt in there recently doing a zombie film, and then scenes for The King's Speech, and then things like Dancing on Ice and Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. I think Strictly Come Dancing's coming there now from the BBC. So stacks of things, interesting things happening, which would never have happened had we not had the campaign.
And of course now, the studios were saved, but a lot of the things that are filmed there are TV shows rather than films. How do you feel about that?
A lot of it's television, because that's the way the industry's moved, and Elstree is not as big as it was, so you can only utilise what facilities you have. But thankfully there's a multi-million-pound grant been given to the studios recently, so they're now contemplating building additional sound stages. That will be great, because then you can have more than 2 or 3 productions in, and you can have a bigger film in than currently. But they've made quite a few films. Jack and the Beanstalk thing, Ewan McGregor, that's been a success apparently. The Sherlock Holmes 2 film with Jude Law and Robert Downey Jr. So it is making films, but the bread and butter is television, because that's a constant. Films come and go, but television is an everyday, 7-day-a-week requirement. So it's good that it's got the two things rolling together, because it makes it economical, makes it sensible, really.
So do you think having the studios is a really good thing for Elstree? It's a really big part of the community and something for locals to be proud of?
Very well, it's certainly something to be proud of, but it also has a practical implication. The council owning it, obviously now get the profits from it. Those profits amount to something close to 20% of the local tax. So without the studio, local residents throughout Hertsmere, not just Boreham Wood, will be paying up to 20% more on their rates bill each year without the studio. So there's a real practical, common sense thing there.
Yes.
And it also, of course, spins off business, because when a production comes into the studio, they often look locally for all sorts of services, and those services therefore benefit. So it does spin off work indirectly into the community.
So locals are benefiting from it in more ways than they might realise, actually.
Well, they do, and when every time you have a Big Brother eviction, or you have audiences turning up for TV shows, they come to Boreham Wood in their hundreds, but they don't necessarily just come for the TV show. They go into the local pubs, cafeterias, restaurants, even the Tesco next door benefits. So there is a spin-off from
Brings people into the area.
It does,
Absolutely.
yes.
And so you've met too many stars and celebrities to count, I expect. Have there been any sort of highlights for you, particular people that you've met and that memory's really stayed with you?
Oh gosh, there've been hundreds over the years. I mean, I tend to have got the biggest kick out of the older film stars that probably you certainly wouldn't remember, and some of your listeners would. But the Sophia Lorens, the Charlton Hestons, David Niven, that era, because they were people that I grew up as a kid watching on the big screen, and to meet them in real life was a big thing. I'm obviously more current people like Simon Cowell and so on. When I talk to people in their teens or 20s, they're more impressed that you've met Simon Cowell than that you've met David Niven or somebody, because they've never heard of David Niven or Roger Moore or any of these people, but they've heard of Simon Cowell.
Absolutely, yeah.
So you have to kind of mention those names. The only one I never did meet specifically was Michael Jackson. He came down to Elstree to visit Spielberg on the set of Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, and everybody was seemingly trying to find a reason to go up to the soundstage, and I had no interest whatsoever. So I just went in the opposite direction. And now I suppose I think, well, that's a bit silly, because Michael Jackson's not with us anymore. To have said that you'd met Michael Jackson would have been interesting as a conversation piece, but it didn't at that particular point in time. And ironically, he was coming back to Elstree to rehearse for his last show, which he was going to be doing in the UK. But of course, sadly, he died. But so he would have been back at Elstree, but no doubt under huge security.
And of course, you were actually made an MBE for your services to the studios and to the film entertainment industry in general, weren't you? How did that feel? Was that something you expected? Or?
Well, I certainly didn't expect it. Several actors, and Sir Sidney Samuelson was the British Film Commissioner, and my secretary and different people got together, and I wasn't aware of it, because obviously you're not supposed to be told, and I never picked up on it. But I suppose, reckoned after spending 8 years of your voluntary time saving the studios, it was worth putting you forward.
Yes.
And so it came out of the blue to get this letter from the Prime Minister's office saying, would you be minded to accept an award, because you, and then tick the box. You know, this little thing, you tick yes or no, because some people do decline. But I'm afraid I'm too egotistical to decline, so I ticked the yes box and put it straight back in the post. And then 3 months later, off to Buckingham Palace, and I thought, well, I need to be nicely chilled, so I had vodka on my cornflakes, and I recommend that, because you just go in and you're nicely chilled and everything's happening around you, and
That's brilliant.
because I'm used to public appearances, but if you're not, it's quite awe-inspiring, because you're in Buckingham Palace. You go into a ballroom with 300 people seated watching you. You have the guards there in uniform. You have a band playing music up in the balcony. And it's a bit nerve-wracking.
You need a bit of Dutch courage for it.
And I think Dutch courage is always recommended, not in a hospital perhaps, but I wouldn't recommend it to the surgeons. But in terms of going there, and the poor chap in front of me, sadly, he was so nervous. And we were told, well, you walk forward, you stop, you bow, you walk 6 steps forward, you have to shake of the hand You walk back 3 steps, you nod and walk, and all these instructions about what you've got to do. And this man was obviously not taking it in because of nerves. And the steward said, well, look, old chap, if everything else fails, just do whatever the person does in front of you, because you can see, because you're standing on the sidelines. And unfortunately, the person in front of him was a lady. So he curtsied rather than bowed. But that happens. You see, when nerves overcome you, you just go into mode and you just don't pick up on it.
Yeah.
So I do recommend, if you ever get into that position, vodka on your cornflakes. Undetectable, but you just go nice, well, hopefully undetectable.
I'll remember that
Not too
one.
much, I don't end up stumbling around here. Pull the Queen down or something.
So what are your plans for the future? Do you intend to be involved with the studios for many years to come?
It's not my choice. I mean, if the studio want to involve me in terms of acting as a historian on occasions wherever they crop up, then fine. It's just an unpaid role that I do, and I'm quite happy to do it. I'm now chairman of Elstree Screen Heritage, again a voluntary organisation dedicated to preserving our heritage, our film and television memories. We are currently interviewing film veterans on the camera at the University of Hertfordshire. We've done 32 so far, and these are marvellous people with all their memories about working in the game. Next year's our big one, 100 years of film and TV production in the town. So we're looking to do special events for that. And this June, we're getting an old Route Master bus. I don't know if you know the old Route Masters.
Yeah.
We're getting a Route Master bus, and we're going to do a classic film and TV locations tour.
Oh, wow.
And so we're going to go around to some special places that people won't know yet, but will be very interesting to people who love cinema and TV of the 60s and 70s and that era.
Yes.
And so fun things like that. It's like a hobby. And just a fun thing to do, really.
Please do keep us posted with all your
Yes,
wonderful
I
plans.
will, yes.
Well, it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you today, Paul. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you.
Really enjoyed it.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you.